I used to think of online spaces as my safe haven, especially during those long nights when the rest of Boston slept, and my thoughts wouldn't let me rest. The soft glow of my laptop screen became my confidant as I navigated through various support groups, trying to make sense of my crumbling marriage. That's where I met Anna Matthews in a forum called Marriages in Crisis, Finding Your Way Back. Anna seemed different from the other members. Her responses carried a warmth that felt genuine, and her advice always seemed to come from a place of deep understanding. She shared stories about her own marriage, her struggles with communication, and how she overcame similar challenges to what I was facing. Over time, our conversations moved from public forum posts to private messages, and I found myself opening up more than I had to anyone else in months. I told her about the tension at our family dinners, how my mother-in-law Patricia's critical glances made me shrink in my chair, and how my husband Tom seemed oblivious to it all. Anna always listened, offering comfort and suggestions that, looking back now, should have raised red flags. But when you're drowning, you don't question the hand that reaches out to save you. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything unraveled. I was in our home office, using Tom's computer because mine was being repaired. He had left his email open, something he rarely did, and that's when I saw it. A notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Anna Matthews has shared a document with you. My heart skipped a beat. Tom didn't know any Anna Matthews, at least none that he'd mentioned. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the notification, and that's when my world shifted on its axis. The email address associated with Anna's account belonged to Patricia, my mother-in-law. The same woman who had spent the last 3 years making subtle jabs at my cooking, questioning my career choices, and trying to orchestrate every holiday and family gathering. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands trembling as I scrolled through previous emails. Each one felt like a knife twisting deeper into my back. There were conversations about me, analyses of my behavior, and strategies. Yes, actual strategies for helping Tom see the truth about his wife. The room started spinning. I thought about all the intimate details I had shared with Anna, my fears about not being good enough for Tom, my struggles with wanting to move away from his hometown of Cambridge to pursue a job opportunity in Seattle, even my private thoughts about starting a family. All of it had gone straight to the one person who seemed determined to drive a wedge between me and her son. I remembered the coffee dates with Anna that never materialized because she was too busy, the profile picture that was always just a bit too blurry to make out clearly, and how she seemed to know exactly which buttons to push when giving advice. It all made perfect sense now, in the worst possible way. The betrayal felt physical, like something heavy sitting on my chest. I had trusted this person, this fictional creation of my mother-in-law's twisted mind, with my deepest insecurities and fears. I had taken her advice, adjusted my behavior based on her suggestions, and even defended her to other group members when they questioned her sometimes harsh perspectives. What kind of person does this? What kind of mother infiltrates her daughter-in-law's safe space, pretending to be a friend, only to gather ammunition? The questions swirled in my mind as I sat in that dark office, the blue light of the computer screen illuminating tears I hadn't realized were falling. I thought about confronting Patricia immediately, but something held me back. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Tom, about our marriage, about the fundamental trust that should exist between family members. I needed to be smart about this, to gather more evidence, to understand the full scope of her deception before I made my next move. As I closed the email tab, my hand hovered over the mouse. Part of me wanted to delete everything, to pretend I had never seen it, to go back to the blissful ignorance of thinking I just had a slightly difficult mother-in-law. But I knew that wasn't an option anymore. The truth, as ugly as it was, had to come out. I took screenshots of everything I could find, saving them to a private folder on my phone. Then I carefully returned Tom's email to exactly how I had found it. Walking out of that office, I felt different, heavier with knowledge, but somehow stronger too. The game had changed, and for the first time, I understood exactly what I was up against. That night, as I lay next to Tom in our bed, listening to his steady breathing, I wondered how many of our recent arguments had been influenced by Anna's advice. How many of my decisions had been subtly manipulated by Patricia's puppet account? The thought made me feel sick, but it also filled me with determination. I would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. The next few days after discovering Patricia's deception felt like walking through a fog. I went through the motions of normal life, going to my job at the local publishing house, making dinner, sharing evening conversations with Tom, but my mind was constantly spinning, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. I started with our message history. After work, I'd sit in my favorite coffee shop on Newberry Street, a place where I knew Patricia would never show up, and methodically go through every interaction I'd had with Anna. The barista, Mike, probably thought I was working on some intense editing project, given how I barely looked up from my screen. If only he knew. The signs were everywhere, screaming at me now that I knew what to look for. Anna had always been particularly interested in conversations about family dynamics. She'd pushed the narrative that mothers-in-law were misunderstood, that they deserved more say in their children's marriages. They've raised these men, she'd written once. They know them better than anyone else ever could. At the time, I'd thought it was just an old-fashioned perspective. Now, I recognized it as Patricia marking her territory. There was a pattern to her manipulation. She would start conversations about my career ambitions, particularly my recent job offer in Seattle. Anna would sympathetically listen to my excitement about the opportunity, then subtly steer the conversation toward the importance of staying close to family. Long-distance relationships can be so challenging, she'd write, and family support is crucial for a young couple. Each message was a carefully placed brick in a wall designed to keep Tom, firmly in Cambridge. I dug deeper, creating a spreadsheet to track the timing of our online conversations against real-life events. The correlation was chilling. Every time I'd had a disagreement with Patricia in person, Anna would message me within days, offering advice that inevitably aligned with Patricia's position. After a tense dinner where I'd mentioned wanting to host Thanksgiving instead of having it at her house, Anna shared a long story about how she regretted taking holiday traditions away from her mother-in-law. The more I investigated, the more my anger grew, but I forced myself to stay methodical. I joined other online support groups using a different name, and sure enough, I found Anna there too. Her digital footprint was extensive. She participated in multiple forums, always pushing the same agenda: the sanctity of mother-son relationships, the importance of keeping families close, the dangers of wives who tried to take over. In one particularly active group, I found a thread where she detailed a situation that mirrored mine perfectly. She wrote about a friend whose daughter-in-law was trying to move across the country, taking her son away from his family and roots. The comments were filled with sympathetic responses, other members rallying behind her cause. It made me sick to realize how many people she'd manipulated into supporting her narrative. I started cross-referencing dates and times of her posts with Patricia's known schedule. The pattern was unmistakable. Anna was most active during Patricia's lunch breaks at the hospital where she worked as an administrator, and late at night after her weekly bridge club meetings. She'd created an entire shadow life online, all focused on maintaining control over her son's life. One afternoon, while reviewing old holiday photos on Tom's computer, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. In a folder marked Family Photos 2023, I found screenshots of my private social media posts that I'd specifically set to be visible only to close friends. Patricia had somehow gained access to my private life in yet another way. Had she created fake accounts to follow me? Had she convinced someone else to spy for her? The most disturbing discovery came when I found Anna's posts about other daughters-in-law. Patricia wasn't just obsessed with controlling my relationship with Tom, she was part of a larger online community of mothers who shared tactics for maintaining influence over their adult children's lives. They exchanged strategies, celebrated victories when their children made decisions that aligned with their wishes, and consoled each other when they felt their influence slipping. I spent hours in the local library, using their computers to avoid leaving any trace on my home devices, documenting everything I found. Each new discovery felt like another piece of a massive, twisted puzzle. Patricia hadn't just created a fake persona, she'd constructed an entire alternate reality where she was the hero, protecting her son from my supposedly destructive influence. The final piece fell into place when I decided to look into Patricia's social media history more carefully. On her Pinterest account, of all places, I found boards filled with articles about toxic daughters-in-law and maintaining bonds with adult children. Some of these articles dated back to before Tom and I were even married. She'd been preparing for this battle before it even began. What haunted me most were the moments of genuine connection I thought I'd had with Anna. Times when I'd been vulnerable, sharing my hopes for the future and my fears about not being good enough for Tom. Had Patricia felt any guilt as she read those messages? Had she ever seen me as a person, or was I just an obstacle to be removed from her son's life? I found myself analyzing every interaction we'd had in person, too. The way she'd suggest couples activities that always somehow included her. The accidental phone calls during our date nights. The constant reminders of Tom's childhood and her role in it. Each memory took on a new, darker meaning. One particular post from Anna kept playing in my mind. She'd written about how daughters-in-law often tried to erase the mother's influence, as if we were in some kind of competition for Tom's affection. The irony was that I'd never wanted to compete with Patricia. All I'd wanted was to build a life with Tom, one that could include both his family and our own dreams. As I sat in our home office late one night, surrounded by printouts of Anna's messages and my notes, I realized that Patricia's elaborate deception had actually given me something valuable: clarity. For years, I'd questioned myself, wondered if I was imagining the tension, if I was the problem. Now I had concrete evidence that the problem had never been me. But this clarity came with responsibility. I couldn't just confront Patricia with what I knew. That would only lead to denials and more manipulation. I needed to understand why. What had driven her to such extreme measures? What was she so afraid of losing? The answer would come from an unexpected source, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my mother-in-law's hatred of me. The truth came to me on a rainy Sunday afternoon in March, in the most unexpected way. I had been avoiding family gatherings since discovering Patricia's deception, making excuses about work deadlines and migraine headaches. But when Tom's sister Sarah called and asked to meet for coffee at Tat Bakery on Beacon Street, something in her voice made me agree. Sarah had always been different from the rest of Tom's family. While Patricia ruled with ironclad control and Tom's father remained conspicuously absent from family dynamics, Sarah was the free spirit who'd moved to Portland for college and never really came back. She visited Boston a few times a year, maintaining just enough distance to stay connected while avoiding the family drama. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where we could talk privately. The cafe was busy with its usual weekend crowd, students from nearby Harvard buried in their laptops, young families sharing pastries, and the occasional tourists studying their phone maps. Sarah walked in shaking rain from her umbrella, her red hair darker than usual from the weather. "You look terrible," she said as she sat down, in that direct way siblings seem to inherit. And I think I know why. She didn't wait for me to respond before pulling out her phone and showing me a screenshot of Anna Matthews' profile. My heart stopped. "How long have you known?" I managed to ask, wrapping my cold hands around my coffee mug. Sarah's face softened. "About Mom's online alter ego? A few weeks. But about why she's doing it? That's a much longer story." She paused, ordering a chai latte when the server passed by. "And it's time you knew everything." What Sarah told me over the next hour shook the foundation of everything I thought I knew about Patricia. 25 years ago, before Tom and Sarah were teenagers, their father hadn't just left the family. He'd left Patricia for another woman. But not just any woman. According to Sarah, this woman had been young, ambitious, working in publishing just like me. She'd even shared my habit of running early mornings along the Charles River. Mom never got over it, Sarah explained, her voice low and careful. Dad's affair lasted 2 years before she found out. The other woman, Rebecca, she used to come to all his work events. She was everything Mom wasn't, career-focused, independent, lived in the city instead of the suburbs. Sound familiar? The parallels hit me like a physical blow. I sat back in my chair, memories flooding my mind. Every time Patricia had commented on my career choices, every disapproving look when I mentioned wanting to move for better opportunities, every subtle criticism of my urban lifestyle, it hadn't really been about me at all. But that's not even the worst part, Sarah continued, stirring her chai absently. Rebecca had been Dad's colleague's wife. She'd been to our house for dinner parties. Mom had trusted her, confided in her about her marriage problems. Rebecca used all of that information to get closer to Dad. The similarity to what Patricia was doing to me, using a fake identity to gather intimate information, was chilling. She had become the very thing that had destroyed her own marriage, turning her pain into a weapon. Why didn't anyone ever tell me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom made us promise never to talk about it. After Dad left, she packed up every photo, every memory of that time. She moved us to a new house, changed her phone number, even started going by Patricia instead of Patty. She tried to erase that whole chapter of her life. Sarah's eyes were distant, remembering. But you can't really erase pain like that. It just transforms. Everything started making horrible sense. The way Patricia obsessively monitored Tom's relationships in college, her immediate resistance when he first told her about me, her increasing paranoia as our relationship grew serious. She wasn't just being a controlling mother, she was fighting phantoms from her past. There's more, Sarah said, pulling out a worn envelope from her bag. I found these when I was helping Mom clean out her attic last month. Inside were old letters between Patricia and her best friend from that time, dating back to the year of the divorce. The pain and anger in those letters was raw, unfiltered. Patricia wrote about feeling replaced, about the humiliation of running into Rebecca at local shops, about her fear that her children would somehow choose their father's new life over her. She never got counseling, Sarah explained. She just hardened. Convinced herself that she had to protect her children from making the same mistakes, from trusting the wrong people. She paused, meeting my eyes. From women like Rebecca. Women like you. The weight of this revelation settled over me like a heavy blanket. Patricia's online deception wasn't just about controlling her son's marriage, it was about preventing history from repeating itself. In her mind, every independent woman who entered her children's lives was potentially another Rebecca, waiting to destroy what she held dear. The thing is, Sarah continued, Mom doesn't see how her fear has warped everything. She's so focused on preventing another betrayal that she's becoming the betrayer. She's turning into exactly what she hated most about Rebecca, someone who uses trust as a weapon. I thought about all the times Patricia had watched me with suspicious eyes, all the times she'd questioned my intentions with Tom. She wasn't seeing me at all. She was seeing Rebecca, seeing every fear and insecurity that had haunted her for 25 years. Does Tom know any of this? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Sarah shook her head. He was too young when it happened. Mom worked hard to shield him from the worst of it. He knows Dad left for another woman, but he doesn't know the details. Doesn't know how it broke Mom, how it changed her. The rain had gotten heavier outside, drumming against the cafe windows. I watched people hurrying past with their collars turned up against the weather, each carrying their own hidden stories, their own secret pains. What am I supposed to do with this information? I asked finally. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's up to you. But I thought you deserved to know. Mom's behavior, it's not okay. It's not excusable. But it is explainable. And sometimes understanding why people hurt us is the first step toward deciding how to handle that hurt. As I drove home that evening, my mind was a storm of emotions. Patricia's actions were still a betrayal, still a violation of trust that made my skin crawl. But now I saw her differently, not as a monster, but as someone whose past trauma had twisted her into becoming the very thing she feared most. The irony was tragic. In trying to prevent history from repeating itself, Patricia had created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Her fear of betrayal had led her to betray. Her fear of losing her son had led her to actions that might cost her exactly that. After my conversation with Sarah, I spent a week planning how to handle the confrontation. I knew it had to be done carefully, not just for my sake, but for Tom's too. This wasn't just about exposing Patricia's deception anymore. It was about addressing decades of unresolved pain that had poisoned our family dynamics. I decided to arrange dinner at Sorellina, an upscale Italian restaurant in Back Bay. It was public enough to prevent a scene, but private enough for an intimate conversation. Patricia had always loved this place. She'd even celebrated her promotion to hospital administrator here last year. I thought maybe being in a space where she felt comfortable might make what was coming slightly easier. Tom was surprised when I suggested inviting his mother to dinner, given how I'd been avoiding family gatherings lately. "Are you sure?" he asked, his forehead creasing with concern. "You've seemed stressed around Mom lately." "I think it's time we had a real conversation," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He had no idea how real it was. Going to be. I made the reservation for a Tuesday evening, knowing Patricia's schedule would be clear. The restaurant's warm lighting and sophisticated atmosphere usually made me feel at ease, but tonight my stomach was in knots as we waited for her to arrive. Tom and I sat at our table, him relaxed and scrolling through his phone, me obsessively adjusting my water glass. Patricia arrived exactly on time, wearing her signature pearl necklace and a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She air-kissed Tom's cheek and gave me what I now recognized as her practice smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "What a lovely surprise," she said, settling into her chair. "It's been too long since we've had dinner together." Her voice carried that slight edge I'd grown familiar with, the one that suggested my recent absences from family events hadn't gone unnoticed. The waiter came by with menus, and we went through the motions of ordering, Patricia choosing the sea base, Tom the osso buco, me barely able to focus enough to select the gnocchi. I waited until our wine had been poured before making my first move. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," I began, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. About family, about trust, about how the past shapes our present. I saw Patricia's hand tighten slightly around her wine glass. "Oh," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "That sounds rather philosophical for a Tuesday evening." I took a sip of water, gathering my courage. "I've also been thinking about online support groups, about how sometimes people aren't who they seem to be." I watched her face carefully as I spoke. "What do you think about that, Anna?" The change in Patricia's expression was subtle but unmistakable. Her perfectly maintained facade cracked for just a moment before she recovered. Tom looked between us, confusion evident on his face. "Anna?" he asked. "Who's Anna?" I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of screenshots I'd prepared. Anna Matthews is someone I met in an online support group for troubled marriages. She became my confidant, someone I trusted with my deepest fears and insecurities. I turned to Patricia. "Would you like to tell Tom who Anna really is, or should I?" Patricia's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice wavered slightly. "Mom?" Tom's voice had taken on an edge I'd never heard before. "What's going on?" I placed my phone on the table between us, screen showing one of Anna's messages next to Patricia's email address. "Your mother created a fake identity to infiltrate my support group. She's been gathering information about our marriage, about my private thoughts and feelings, for months." The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, other diners continued their meals, unaware of the drama unfolding at our table. A server passed by with a tray of drinks, ice clinking quietly. "Is this true?" Tom asked his mother, his voice barely controlled. Patricia's hands were shaking now. "You don't understand," she began. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me? By spying on my wife? By pretending to be someone else to gain her trust?" Tom's voice was rising slightly, and I placed a hand on his arm to calm him. "You don't know what it's like," Patricia hissed, her carefully maintained exterior crumbling. "You don't know what can happen when you trust the wrong person, when you let someone into your life who can destroy everything." "I know about Rebecca," I said quietly. Both Tom and Patricia froze at the name. "Who's Rebecca?" Tom asked, looking between us. Patricia's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Sarah told you," she whispered. "She had no right." "She had every right," I countered, keeping my voice low and steady. "Because your unresolved pain from that situation is destroying your relationship with your son and his wife." Tom was looking increasingly frustrated. Will someone please tell me what's going on? I took a deep breath. Rebecca was the woman your father left your mother for, 25 years ago. She was young, worked in publishing, lived in the city. I let the parallels hang in the air. Understanding dawned on Tom's face. So that's why, he said, turning to his mother. That's why you've never accepted her. Because she reminds you of. She'll do the same thing, Patricia interrupted, her voice urgent. They always do. They come into your life, sophisticated and independent, making you think they know better than family, and then they take everything away. Mom, Tom said, his voice pained. That's not what's happening here. I'm not Dad, and she's not Rebecca. You don't know that, Patricia insisted. I had to protect you. I had to know what she was really thinking, what she was planning. When I saw her posts in that support group, you violated my privacy, I cut in. You manipulated me. You used my trust to gather information about me, just like you claim Rebecca did to you. Don't you see the irony in that? Patricia's face crumpled. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything, to have your whole life torn apart by someone you trusted. No, but I understand what it's like to have someone you should be able to trust betray you completely, I replied. Because that's what you did to me. Tom pushed his chair back from the table slightly, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I can't believe this. All these years, I thought you were just being overprotective. But this is something else entirely. Everything I did for you, Patricia insisted, reaching for his hand. Tom pulled away. No, Mom. You did this for yourself. To try to control something you're afraid of losing. But in doing this, in violating our trust this way, you might have just created exactly what you were trying to prevent. The truth of his words hung heavy in the air. Around us, the restaurant continued its normal evening service, plates being cleared, wine being poured, casual conversations floating by. But at our table, years of deception and pain were finally being laid bare. I have all the evidence, I said quietly, pulling out more screenshots. Every conversation, every manipulation, every time you used what I told Anna against me in real life. But what hurts most isn't the deception itself, it's that you never gave me a chance. You decided who I was based on your past trauma, and then did everything you could to make that false perception a reality. Patricia sat there, tears now falling freely, her perfect makeup beginning to smear. The confident, controlling woman who had terrorized my marriage was gone, replaced by someone who looked small and afraid. The restaurant's quiet elegance became suffocating as Patricia's carefully constructed world crumbled around her. She tried to regain control, dabbing at her tears with her linen napkin, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped, and neither Tom nor I could unsee what lay beneath. I want to see everything, Tom said quietly, his voice steady but strained. Show me all of it. I handed him my phone, watching as he scrolled through months of screenshots. His face grew increasingly pale as he read through conversations between his mother and me, conversations where she'd posed as Anna, gaining my trust only to use it against me. Patricia sat rigid in her chair, watching her son discover the extent of her betrayal. You told her about Seattle? He asked suddenly, looking up at me. About the job offer? I nodded slowly. I needed someone to talk to about it. Anna, your mother, seemed understanding at first. She helped me work through my concerns about moving, about what it would mean for us. I paused, glancing at Patricia. But then she started planting doubts, suggesting that marriages often fall apart when couples move away from family, telling stories about other couples who'd tried long-distance moves and ended up divorced. Is that why you turned it down? Tom's voice had an edge to it now. Is that why you suddenly decided it wasn't the right time? Before I could answer, Patricia spoke up. I was trying to save your marriage. Moving across the country, away from your support system, your family, stop it. Tom's fist hit the table, making the wine glasses rattle. A few nearby diners glanced our way, but he barely noticed. You don't get to decide what saves our marriage. You don't get to manipulate us like we're characters in some story you're writing. The waiter approached cautiously with our main courses, but Tom waved him away. None of us had any appetite left. I want to know everything, he continued, turning back to his mother. Every lie, every manipulation. Not just with the online stuff. Everything. Because I'm starting to wonder how much of my life has been shaped by your fear and control. Patricia's face crumpled. Tommy, please, don't Tommy me, he cut her off. I'm not a child anymore, Mom. I'm a grown man who just discovered his mother has been actively trying to sabotage his marriage. I think I've earned the right to some honest answers. What followed was 2 hours of painful revelations. Patricia's voice trembled as she admitted to other deceptions, how she'd manipulated situations to keep Tom close to home for college, how she'd subtly undermined his previous relationships, how she'd orchestrated, coincidental, meetings with family friends' daughters she deemed more suitable than me. Remember Caroline Peterson? She said, her voice small. It wasn't a coincidence that she started working at your law firm last year. Her mother and I, we thought you two would be perfect together. Someone from a good family who understood the importance of staying close to home. Tom laughed bitterly. Caroline Peterson? The one who mysteriously appeared at every office happy hour for 3 months straight? The one you kept accidentally mentioning at family dinners? He shook his head. I thought she was just being friendly. God, how many people have you dragged into your schemes? I was trying to protect you, Patricia insisted again, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. No, I said firmly. You were trying to protect yourself. You were so afraid of losing Tom the way you lost his father that you created the very situation you were trying to prevent. Your manipulation, your distrust, your need for control, those are the things damaging your relationship with your son, not me. The truth of my words seemed to hit Patricia like a physical blow. She slumped in her chair, looking suddenly older, more vulnerable. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too, she whispered to Tom. But don't you see? Tom's voice had softened slightly. You've been losing me bit by bit with every manipulation, every lie, every attempt to control my life. I just didn't realize it until now. A couple at a nearby table asked for their check, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional scene unfolding next to them. The restaurant had grown quieter, the dinner crowd thinning out as the evening wore on. What happens now? Patricia asked, her voice small and uncertain. Tom sat back in his chair, running a hand over his face. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that I can't trust you right now. You didn't just betray my wife, you betrayed me. You took advantage of her vulnerability, used her trust against her, all while pretending to be someone she could confide in. I need to know something, I interjected, looking directly at Patricia. All those conversations we had, when I shared my fears about not being good enough for Tom, my worries about fitting into the family, my insecurities about our future, did any of it make you see me as a person? Or was I just always the enemy in your mind? Patricia's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. I didn't expect you to be so real, she admitted. Sometimes, reading your messages, I would forget for a moment that I was supposed to be gathering information. I would find myself wanting to genuinely comfort you, to help you. She paused, tears welling up again. But then I would remember Rebecca, remember how real and vulnerable she had seemed too, and the fear would take over again. So you let your past trauma justify destroying someone else's trust, Tom said quietly. You became exactly what hurt you, Mom. You became the person who uses intimacy as a weapon. The weight of his words seemed to finally break something in Patricia. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Around us, the restaurant staff began their closing routine, dimming lights and clearing tables with practiced efficiency. I think we're done here, Tom said, signaling for the check. Mom, I'll call you a cab. I don't think you should drive right now. Please, Patricia reached for his hand. Please don't shut me out. I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just don't cut me off completely. Tom gently pulled his hand away. I need time, Mom. We both do. What you've done, it's going to take a long time to process. And I can't promise you'll like what I decide when I'm done processing it. As we waited for Patricia's cab outside the restaurant, the cool Boston night air carried the distant sound of traffic and boat horns from the harbor. The city felt different somehow, as if the revelation of such intimate betrayal had changed the very landscape of our lives. The weeks following our confrontation with Patricia passed in a strange blur. Boston's spring arrived with its usual unpredictability, warm sunshine one day, bitter wind the next, matching the turbulent emotions swirling through our family. Tom took it harder than I expected. He threw himself into work at his law firm, often staying late at the office on Federal Street, his silhouette visible against the city lights when I'd walk by to meet him. During our quiet evenings at home, he'd sometimes scroll through old family photos on his phone, as if searching for signs he might have missed, moments when his mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I keep thinking about all the times she might have manipulated situations," he said one night as we sat on our apartment's small balcony, watching the sunset paint the Charles River golden. "Remember when we were planning our wedding? How she somehow convinced us to change the venue from that place in Newport to the Boston Harbor Hotel." I nodded, remembering her careful arguments about family tradition, about keeping things close to home. "She said it was about your grandmother being too frail to travel," I added softly. "Grandma Helen went on a cruise to Alaska that same month," Tom said with a bitter laugh. God, how did I not see it? The reality was that Patricia's manipulation had been so subtle, so skillfully woven into the fabric of our lives, that it had become nearly invisible. It took Sarah's revelation about Rebecca and the discovery of the Anna deception to make us see the pattern that had been there all along. Patricia tried to make amends in her own way. She sent emails, left voicemails, even had flowers delivered to my office at the publishing house. Each attempt at contact came with desperate promises of change, of therapy, of doing whatever it took to repair the damage. But the words rang hollow. They were still about control, about getting what she wanted, just wrapped in a different package. Tom finally agreed to meet with her after a month, but only with a family therapist present. Dr. Martinez's office in Cambridge became neutral ground where mother and son could begin the painful process of unpacking decades of manipulation and control. "Your mother has what we call anxious attachment style," Dr. Martinez explained during one session. "The trauma of your father's affair and abandonment created deep-seated fears that she never properly addressed. Instead of healing, she developed controlling behaviors as a way to prevent future abandonment." Patricia sat quietly during these sessions, her usual commanding presence diminished. She'd lost weight, and her perfectly maintained appearance had slipped somewhat. The therapy forced her to confront not just her actions as Anna, but the pattern of behavior that had defined her relationship with her children for years. "I don't know who I am without the control," she admitted during one particularly raw session. "Ever since your father left, my whole life has been about making sure I never felt that helpless again. But in trying to prevent that pain, I've caused so much more." The therapy sessions were exhausting, but they were also revealing. We learned that Patricia's own mother had been controlling and manipulative, creating a generational pattern of toxic behavior. We discovered that her fear of abandonment had roots that went far deeper than her failed marriage. Meanwhile, I had my own healing to do. I started seeing a separate therapist, working through the violation of trust I'd experienced. The hardest part wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the way it had made me question every interaction, every relationship. "The thing about manipulation," my therapist explained, "is that it doesn't just damage the current relationship, it damages your ability to trust in future relationships. But recognizing the manipulation is the first step toward healing from it." 3 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected email from one of the support group moderators. They had discovered Patricia's deception and were reaching out to everyone who had interacted with Anna. The revelation that I wasn't her only victim brought a complex mix of emotions: relief that I wasn't alone, anger that she had hurt others, sadness for all the trust she had destroyed. Tom and I made some significant changes during this time. We decided to revisit the Seattle opportunity, recognizing that Patricia's manipulation had influenced our decision to stay in Boston. The choice to move wasn't about running away from the situation, but about reclaiming our right to make decisions based on our own desires and needs, not fear or manipulation. "I can't let her control our lives anymore," Tom said as we toured apartments in Seattle via video chat. "Even if that control comes from my own fear of hurting her." Patricia's reaction to news of our planned move was telling. Her first instinct was to fall back into manipulation, talking about her health, about family obligations, about how she'd be all alone. But then, perhaps because of the therapy, she caught herself. "I'm scared," she admitted instead, her voice small but honest. "The thought of you being so far away terrifies me. But I'm trying to understand that my fear can't be your prison." It wasn't a perfect response, but it was progress. Small steps toward healing, toward breaking the cycle of control and fear that had dominated our family dynamics for so long. Sarah came to visit us in Boston one last time before our move. We sat in our favorite coffee shop on Newberry Street, the same one where she had first revealed the truth about Rebecca to me. "Mom's different," she observed, watching the people pass by outside. "Still struggling, still trying to control things sometimes, but different. More aware, at least. Do you think she'll ever really change?" I asked. Sarah considered this, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I think she's finally facing her demons instead of turning them into weapons. That's something, at least." The day we left for Seattle was gray and drizzly, typical Boston weather saying goodbye. Patricia came to the airport, standing awkwardly at the security checkpoint. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, but there was something different in her eyes, a hint of acceptance, perhaps. "I'm sorry," she said, the words simple but weighted with meaning. "Not just for the Anna thing, but for everything. For not seeing you as a person, for letting my fear poison everything it touched." It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. As we walked through security, Tom squeezed my hand, both of us carrying the weight of everything that had happened, but also the hope of everything that could be. Our new life in Seattle began with rain too, but it felt cleansing rather than gloomy. We were building something new, something that wasn't shadowed by manipulation and control. Tom started therapy on his own, working through the complex emotions of being both a victim of and witness to his mother's manipulation.